choreographed dance, music combining classical, Western, and Chinese instruments, and innovative 3D backdrop. Come and see it once in your lifetime. Tickets at shenyang.com/FL.
Tune in to the Shrink and Wrap Show here on Tan Talk Radio. Our stories and our topics will include, but are not limited to, everyday issues. We're here for you, for our listeners. We want to know what's important to you. So again, don't miss us on Tan Talk Radio. Tune in again, Shrink and Wrap Show. We'll see you then.
The Shrink and Wrap Show at its new time, Thursdays from 4 to 5 p.m. here on the Tan Talk Radio Network.
Hi, I'm Dawn Reese with the Dawn Reese Show, most powerful names in entertainment, every Thursday at 5 p.m. I have so many different segments I'm so excited to share with you, from miracle stories to celebrity interviews with Hollywood connections to travel to local business, promoting your business on the air with me, an amazing opportunity to grow your business. Tune in to the Tan Talk Radio Network, 106.1 FM on Thursdays, 5 p.m. with me, Dawn Reese.
Don't turn it off now. You need this stuff. Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network.
ICE presence has disrupted all aspects of life in Minnesota and led tragically to the death of Renee Good. It's the outcome of government overreach that favors force over legitimacy.
You are about to enter the arena of real news and factual commentary on The Voice of Reason here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. Now, here is your host for today's program, Ed Golly.
We're going to open with an excerpt from a powerful new editorial from the Minneapolis Star Tribune that says this: Minnesota has endured unrest before. What the state is now experiencing looks and feels different. Battalions of armed federal agents are moving through neighborhoods, transit hubs, malls, and parking lots, and staging near churches, mosques, and schools. Strangers with guns have metastasized in spaces where daily life should be routine and safe. It feels like a military occupation. Joining me in the studio today, attorney Gary Gibbons, along with attorney and former circuit judge Kevin Carey.
Hello, Ed.
And we want to begin with what the Department of Homeland Security Secretary Barbie Noem said when she held a press conference only about 2.5 hours after the Minneapolis shooting of Renee Good. Who are you going to believe, her or your lying eyes?
At 10:25 a.m. Central Time, Immigration and Customs Enforcement were carrying out lawful operations here in Minneapolis. Because of the adverse weather that Minneapolis has seen in recent snow, one of the vehicles became stuck and ensnared in the snow. Law enforcement were attempting to push out this vehicle, and when a mob of agitators that were harassing them all day began blocking them in, shouting at them, and impeding law enforcement operations. ICE officers and agents approached the vehicle of the individual in question, who was blocking the officers in with her vehicle, and she had been stalking and impeding their work all throughout the day. ICE agents repeatedly ordered her to get out of the car and to stop obstructing law enforcement, but she refused to obey their commands. She then proceeded to weaponize her vehicle, and she attempted to run a law enforcement officer over. This appears as an attempt to kill or to cause bodily harm to agents, an act of domestic terrorism. The ICE officer, fearing for his life and the other officers around him and the safety of the public, fired defensive shots. He used his training to save his own life and that of his colleagues. He was treated at a local hospital, has been released, and is now with family.
Well, if that, you can also believe elephants can fly, right, Gary?
Defensive shots, 2 of them were fired as the car was, flying away from him. And it's unbelievable, really, the spin that they're trying to put on this. And then going after this woman's widow, essentially, and trying to say that she's involved in some sort of criminal activity instead of looking at this shooter who really should be under arrest right now.
For Noem to call Renee Good, this victim of this murder, domestic terrorist is just absurd. this had just happened last week. We've had when our show came on, we've had now a week to kind of digest this a little bit and process it. But if you look at the video, it's nothing about what Rowdy was is what she said. I watched it 3 times last night. That the car was slowly turning away from where this killer was. By the way, I think this is going to be another George Floyd situation, which also, as you know, was out of Minnesota. But to say that this vehicle was a weapon and he was somehow, his life was in danger is just absurd. And by the way, one shot, three shots to the head. One was straight on through the windshield. The other 2, he came around and took 2 shots through that passenger side. I'm sorry, through the driver's side. I'm not sure if that window was open or not. I think it was open, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. So he was aggressive in what he was doing. He wasn't in any way in harm's way. And for the vice president, by the way, to hear what he had to say about this is there's a complete lack of any concern about the fact there are now 3 children who are without a mother.
Well, the remarkable thing is that she drew so many conclusions so quickly after the incident, and now believes that she needs to stand by everything that she said, even though as we began to see videos from multiple angles, we see that pretty much everything she said was wrong. On Sunday morning, she ends up on CNN being interviewed by Jake Tapper. And in that interview, she was questioned about her press conference and the astonishing outpouring of blatant lies and falsehoods that she had prevented at that event.
You've also been criticized for your comments. The shooting, we should note, was Wednesday at 10:37 a.m. Eastern. Just over 2 hours later, the Department of Homeland Security put out a statement definitively asserting what had happened, defending the ICE agent, accusing Renee Good of domestic terrorism. That's a characterization that you reiterated in a press conference half an hour later. Now, Republican Senator Tom Tillis said, quote, "It was very unusual to have a senior law enforcement official to draw a conclusion about an event where the scene was still being processed. Generally speaking, law enforcement would recognize that a life was lost, that families are changed forever, the shooter's life will change forever. We're collecting video. We're trying to assess the situation." Why did you not wait for an investigation before making your comments?
Well, everything that I've said has been proven to be factual and the truth. This administration wants to operate in transparency. I have the responsibility as the Secretary of Homeland Security to know this information as soon as possible. Had just been in Minneapolis the day before, had already had conversations with officers on the ground and supervisors and knew the facts and decided that the department and the people of this country deserve to know the truth of the situation of what had unfolded in Minneapolis.
Well, with all due respect, Secretary, the first thing you said was, quote, "What happened was our ICE officers were out in an enforcement action. They got stuck in the snow because of the adverse weather that is in Minneapolis. They were attempting to push out their vehicle and a woman attacked them and those surrounding them and attempted to run them over and rammed them with her vehicle." That's not what happened. We all saw what happened.
It absolutely is what happened. Those officers had been out in enforcement action. A vehicle had been stuck. They had come to help get that vehicle out. That's when this individual started blocking traffic for minutes and minutes.
You said that the woman attacked them and surrounded them and attempted to run them over and ram them with her vehicle.
Blocked the road for a long time and was yelling at them and impeding a federal law enforcement investigation. That's what you need to focus on, Jake, is they were breaking the law by impeding and obstructing a law enforcement operation. They were breaking the law already, and these officers were doing their due diligence of what their training had prepared them to do to make sure they were handling it appropriately.
So blocking the road. The first thing we see in the first video that was produced, that was released, I should say, from behind the vehicle, was the car beside hers, and there was one on each side, simply drove right down the road without having to drive on the sidewalk or over the curb or anything. The road was not really blocked, even though she was parked perpendicular. But she's asserting that all this happened at a separate incident. So why isn't there any video of that? Why didn't they shoot at her then if she was really trying to run them down? How did she surround them with one car? I mean, come on. It just goes from bad to worse to embarrassing.
Ed, when you sell your soul to Trump, which is what you do, you have no moral integrity or courage when you sell your soul. You're required by him to double down, which is what she's done. You think she's had a few days to maybe understand, since she immediately came out at the time when she had no information that was valid. But she comes out days later, she continues to double down. Ask Joni Ernst how well that went for her, doubling down. She's had to give up her Senate seat in Iowa because Trump gives you no quarter to come back and say, maybe I wasn't fully correct. You have to double down. And he doesn't care what it costs you. It's cost earned her Senate seat. Noam had no credibility anyway, but they are never allowed to come off of their initial statement.
And that was over the health care issue.
Correct.
Right? And
we all have to die sometime.
Yeah.
Well, and then the video also shows that the last words from the victim are, "I'm not mad at you," and the words from the shooter are, "You effing B word."
Yeah.
Okay.
And then he's, of course, walking
Who's
around.
the aggressor?
Exactly. I mean, and of course, these goons aren't trained because if they were, he never would have been in front of that car.
That's the training that they are receiving. They are being told to stand in front of the car, which regular police officers, trained police officers, do not do that because they know A, it's dangerous, and B, that's just not the way that you're supposed to engage with people. And they are trying to provoke someone from running over them.
And I also question, if he had gotten hit by the car, how could he have fired his weapon? He would have been, being knocked off his feet, knocked off balance. Instead, he's standing right there as she drove by, firing into the car.
He didn't just
with
stand.
a gun in one hand and his cell phone in the other.
He moved around from the initial shot was through the windshield. He moved around to have a better shot without a window to shoot her twice in the head. He moved around. He was not hit by that car. But let me comment quickly. The Minnesota Attorney General has filed a federal lawsuit, very strong lawsuit, saying that get these people out of here. What they're doing is violating the Constitution, the statutes. I know no one in that administration cares about the law or the Constitution, but we're not taking this lying down. I think this is going to be another George Floyd. Also, to the extent of accountability, there will be most likely a state indictment. And you made a comment, I think, a reference, Gary, to that there'll be no assistance from the federal government. They've already made the Civil Rights Division has already made a decision. They're not pursuing this in any way. So the federal government has become an impediment to truth. So if the state goes forward with this, as I think they should, they're not getting any help at all from the federal government.
And think about how that's changed. It used to be that the federal government coming in to do an investigation to help a state out, they were the gold standard for actually investigating without any kind of bias involved. To step back, we aren't the people that were involved locally with this. We're going to come in, we're going to look at the situation with this particular officer. That's completely changed, and they're off the rails with everything that they do, and there's just a complete lack of trust now, but from everyone for what's happening with the federal government.
And it's getting worse. Liz Oyer, I think we're going to hear from her a little later, and she's been on the show with her legal commentary before, but she's made the point that without getting the evidence that the feds have acquired, it will be much harder. There's also a qualified immunity issue that may be there as well. But I do believe the state of Minnesota is not going to just lay down on this.
And let's hear, as Jake Tapper continued the interview, how Noam stood on all of her blatantly obvious lies and continues to portray what we all know is a total distortion of events that we can plainly see on the video recordings of the murder.
So if this agents were perfectly fine, if everything he did was accurate, does that mean that other ICE agents should
He
look
wasn't
at what?
perfectly fine. He was injured. He went to the hospital.
No,
He
his
was
actions
treated.
were fine. I didn't
In
say.
fact, I think a lot of people and the guests and even you yourself called this situation something very different and untruthful about what it was, as far as
What
this
did I say that was
individual,
untruthful?
That this was not a correct definition of what was happening on the ground.
I said that your description, they were attempting to push out their vehicle and a woman attacked them and those surrounding them and attempted to run them over and ram them with her vehicle, is not what we see on the videotape, and it's not.
It absolutely is the facts of what happened on the ground that day. They
No,
were there pushing out a vehicle earlier. They had helped each other.
But that's not
do
what
that.
you said. That's not what you said. Yes, they were pushing out a
absolutely
vehicle.
what I said. There's not one.
We
thing
all
that-
seen the video. I don't need to relitigate it. We've all seen the video. She is blocking the street. They approach her.
You haven't seen the video of the entire morning and the previous encounters with this individual.
Oh, we have
Yes.
aired it. Yes, we have. On Thursday, we were airing and noting the fact that she was there for several minutes, for minutes and minutes and minutes. She was protesting without
And at
question.
previous locations that morning, that absolutely, that these vehicles had been previously down the block on video that you haven't seen. There's more information.
But the
that
question-
this
the question
individual
is
was
not-
impeding law enforcement operations throughout the previous moments and hours before this incident
The question is, what was she doing when she was moving her car?
The question
That's the question.
is why are we arguing with a president who's working to keep people safe? Why are we arguing with law enforcement operations that have gone on in this country for years, and we're working to collect murderers and rapists and drug traffickers and fraudsters off the streets of Minnesota, and we don't have local law enforcement and local elected officials that are partnering with us to help do that work? Overwhelmingly, the people in this country said they wanted America to be safe again, that they didn't want dangerous criminals on our street.
So a whole fabrication of events that just goes from bad to worse, but it's all in the eye of the beholder. Because conservatives will look at that video and say, oh, she was absolutely positively trying to run the guy down. And she'd been doing that earlier in the day when, curiously, she was simultaneously dropping her kid off at school. I mean, when the evidence is even blatantly obvious on the video, conservatives will interpret it any way they want.
Well, by the way, Corey Lewandowski runs this department, who's having an extramarital affair with Noam. I'm not trying to make this about personal, but she's not running that department. If you want to get into it, Lewandowski is running this department, and she just gets up there and says whatever Trump wants her to say. Jake Tapper's no liberal. He wrote a very damning book about Joe Biden. He's a very objective person. A lot of Democrats were upset with Biden about his book upset with Tapper about his book about Biden, but Tapper's just telling the truth. We have the video. So when you get this absurdity from the head of a major department in this country, all you can do is scratch your head.
At the end of the video, it's clear that the shooter, Jonathan Ross, was walking back to his car while the neighbor that had videoed this was screaming, shame, shame, shame. There was nothing wrong with him. You can see that he's walking quickly to get back to his car because he's so embarrassed about what happened. But yeah.
Well, one of the points you made earlier is valid, Gary, about training. And again, I'm sure these are not, to some degree, I think these people half of them are vigilantes, but I'm sure these are very stressful situations. But he certainly was not trained and prepared for this situation. And he knows he's got a problem. I don't care what these people on the TV say. He knows he's got a legal problem, that he could be spending a good part of his life in jail for what he did.
But isn't this the golden goose that's been dropped in Crooked Donald's lap? Because I think that a lot of these major league issues that are going on today, whether it's this, Venezuela, or taking over Greenland, are all distractions to take our eye and mind off of two things. The Epstein files, which we'll talk about at length in the second half of the program today, and of course the economy, that he's not able to really move the needle on that. So he wants to agitate the situation further. He wants more goons in there harassing people and causing more trouble so that nobody will be talking about the Epstein files anymore.
Well, and he was starting to get some pushback from the courts on his the level of his authority. Remember the decision saying, that he couldn't send in the National Guard to Chicago. Mm-hmm. And so immediately after that, what does he do? He turns to foreign affairs, where the courts are more apt to give him leeway and say that, when it comes to domestic security, and foreign affairs, the president has more leeway involved in making his decisions. And so he's looking all over the globe at things he can do to try to distract.
If you had any doubt about whether or not that he's a dictator, the Declaration of Independence cited specifically 40 wrongdoings by King George is why there's a need to be independent from the king. Trump has been guilty of 32 of those 40, objectively. If you have any doubt about his governing style.
Also, I think one other consideration is this. He can fool himself about his poll numbers. He can delude himself into thinking he's got 70% approval ratings, even when they tell him otherwise. But what he can't delude himself about is the results of the elections that took place last November, where he saw overwhelming majorities putting Democratic governors in power. And of course, Mamdani, well, that's a given in New York City. But in all of the special races, the Democrats took sweeping victories. And so he can see what's coming in November as his numbers continue to spiral, meaning that he wants this military presence to be the norm in blue cities so that he can go in and seize those voting machines and interfere with the elections, keeping Republicans in power in Congress so he doesn't get impeached. Because he's come right out and said it. If they get control of Congress, the first thing they're going to do is impeach me.
Well,
why not? He's a criminal.
Well, what he's seen, Ed, is not just the victory, but the overperformance. That even when Democrats lose an election, and there've been many elections in the last year that we've talked about, is even when, for example, in Florida, there were two congressional seats that were won by Republicans, but much lower percentage. So the key is that the problem that they have is the overperformance, and we talked about the other day about these representatives in these purple districts are going to have a serious problem politically, and Trump doesn't really care about them. And we talked about until the primaries are over, they won't probably speak out. But yes, these are all distractions. And one last quick point there, what they're doing, this federal government, they are trying to trigger violence. The violence is not happening from the get-go. They're in there to instigate the violence.
Federal government says that this fellow Ross has immunity from any liability for his actions, and that he's not going to be prosecuted. They've drawn the conclusions about the event before even investigating, so we know it's going to be a whitewash. What could possibly happen to him, if anything? Well, Liz Oyer is the former pardon attorney for the Department of Justice, and here she questions whether the agent who shot Renee Good in Minneapolis will be held accountable. Let's hear how this highly respected legal counselor evaluates the issue.
After the horrific killing of Renee Good by an ICE agent in Minneapolis, many of us want to know if the agent will be held accountable. This raises some important legal issues that I want to discuss. I'm Liz Oyer, the former pardon attorney for the Department of Justice. Normally, a law enforcement officer who egregiously violates the rights of a citizen would face a federal investigation and prosecution by the Department of Justice. There's actually a federal law that specifically addresses this type of misconduct. It's called Section 242, and it's the same law that was used to convict the officers who murdered George Floyd. Section 242 makes it a crime for a government official to willfully violate the constitutional rights of a citizen. A violation resulting in death can be punished with life in prison or even the death penalty. Ordinarily, the Justice Department investigates and prosecutes these cases, but right now, DOJ has totally abandoned its responsibility. And it's quite clear from the public statements of Trump officials that they are not going to discipline this agent. So the question becomes, can the state of Minnesota prosecute him under their own laws? That is a complicated question. You may have heard J.D. Vance and others claim that ICE agents have absolute immunity from state prosecution. That is false. The U.S. Supreme Court has clearly said that federal officers do not have general immunity from state law. But federal agents do have a degree of immunity under a section of the Constitution called the Supremacy Clause. Essentially, they're immune from prosecution if they are performing duties authorized by federal law and their actions are necessary and proper to perform their duties. This is where things get tricky. Deciding whether the immunity requirements are met is the job of a federal judge, not a jury. The judge has to examine all the evidence and decide whether the officer's actions were reasonable. This is a very fact-specific analysis, and because of appeals, etc., it can take years to resolve. Most legal experts believe that prosecuting an ICE agent in state court will be an uphill battle. Another important note is that any successful prosecution will require a complete and fair investigation. Right now, Kristi Noem is blocking Minnesota police from investigating at all. She claims they have no jurisdiction. This is wrong, and we need to demand a thorough investigation.
It's unbelievable that they are, as we talked about earlier, the feds used to come in here and were the gold standard for investigating like this. And instead they are turning that 180 degrees and saying, no, we're not even going to investigate. We're not even going to look at this. We're not going to do any fact investigation. In fact, we're going to say that, this is open season on everybody. If you're an ICE officer, what they're saying is you have the green light, shoot away.
Well, the mayor of New York, Mondani, has been putting out a video on YouTube because of these agents have no problem violating the Constitution and knocking doors down. What he's done in these videos is show what a warrant looks like, and he's, again, these people who they're not lawyers or judges, probably, and they're being faced with these guns at their head, but he's been attempting to show them this is what a warrant looks like, and it has to be signed by a judge, etc. Because apparently ICE is showing this other document around. It's not a warrant. A warrant has to be, you have to have search and seizure in the Constitution. And as a judge, I dealt with these issues. I had officers come to me, and agents say, 2 a.m, I've had people had come to my home and say, I need you to sign a search warrant. But a judge, you can't invade somebody's house without a third-party judge agreeing that there's a need for it. So they ignore that. But
probable cause that a crime has been committed.
Correct.
Right?
So the mayor is trying in New York to educate people who don't understand this, and it's being violated all the time. The behavior, Ed, of the ICE agents is getting worse. It's increasing in terms of illegal and improper conduct.
Yeah, I saw videos yesterday of them going into a Target store and grabbing 2 employees of Target who were both U.S. citizens, wrestling them to the ground, and they were showing a montage of some of the ICE agents, and they're doing the knee on the neck of people. They're grinding their faces into the ground. It's completely out of control, and they've hired all of these January 6th, insurrectionists as ICE agents, paying them huge bonuses, no training, and they send them out on the streets, and then they say, hey, you can do whatever you want. You're immune from any kind of prosecution for anything that you do.
Well, there's some attempts at congressional pushback too. As we've shared before, the budget, that big horrible bill that Trump brags about, and we've talked about this, increased the ICE budget over 13 times. Incredible. So there's a pushback now from some Democrats in the Congress, and with some Republican support, I think, to limit that budget, because they basically have a blank check. They bring these people in there and pay them a $50,000 bonus, and they're not trained. They're not trained to do law enforcement.
And this is the money that would have been used for healthcare for people that are being cut off. And there was an article in the paper today about how there are 10,000 people in the state of Florida who are they're taking HIV drugs that are probably going to die from that. These are the monies that this is the result of this policy, is that people are dying everywhere, not only from what's happening in the streets, but also what's going to happen in their homes.
Well, the other issue too, besides the criminal liability, is civil liability. Is you have 2 lawyers here, Ed. Whether there'd be any civil liability to either against the federal government or individually against these these agents. But Renee Good, she's not the first. She is it's been out there very visibly, and I think she's going to be another George Floyd as an indication of police improper conduct. But there have been others before her, and there will be many more after her.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's 34 minutes past the hour. You're listening to the Voice of Reason here on the Tan Talk Radio Network with me, Ed Golly, my co-hosts, attorney and former circuit judge Kevin Carey, and attorney Gary Gibbons. It's time for a short break. And when we come back, we're going to look at what's going on in Venezuela and how the oil companies are responding to the president's effort to increase production there. And the United States Chief Law Enforcement Officer, Pam Blondy, seems to be violating the law every single day in her refusal to release the Epstein files. That more. In the second half of the program, we'll open the phones if you'd like to call in and weigh in. In the meantime, quick break and then back with more of the issues that the conservatives never want you to hear about.
Are you a writer, inventor? Do you have questions about your intellectual property rights? Well, tune in every Tuesday and Thursday morning at 11 o'clock for Joy on Paper. Once a month, I will have a special guest, the writer's legal eagle, Bill Larson of Larson & Larson, who can answer your questions. Protect your valuable work. Email me your questions to patsy.radio@gmail.com and then listen in every Tuesday and Thursday at 11 a.m. right here on Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network. That's patsy.radio@gmail.com.
You're listening to the Voice of Reason on the Tan Talk Radio Network.
Tune in to the Shrink and Wrap Show here on Tan Talk Radio. Our stories and our topics will include, but are not limited to, everyday issues. We're here for you, for our listeners. We want to know what's important to you. So again, don't miss us on Tan Talk Radio. Tune in again, Shrink and Wrap Show. We'll see you then.
The Shrink and Wrap Show at its new time, Thursdays from 4 to 5 p.m. here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. And now it's time for the Only a Conservative Could Think It Minute with your host, Ed Golly.
To some, January 6th felt like an ending, the final violent death spasms of the cult of Crooked Donald. Instead, it proved to be the dawn of Trump's total liberation. He had stress-tested his own theory of his base, that they would swallow insane, ludicrous election lies simply because he asked them to, would march themselves into felonies because they thought he wanted them to. Ever since, Crooked Donald has lived his life in accordance with the lessons he learned that day. There was no act of selfishness or vindictiveness too grotesque for him to survive, provided he kept his people adequately juiced in the belief that their enemies were worse. Only a conservative would believe we've ever left the January 6th era. Think about that.
Don't turn it off now. You need this stuff. Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network.
You may reach us by email at WTANvoice@AOL.com if you'd like to make a few comments on the program. WTANvoice, all one word, and the carrier's AOL.com. Was the Minnesota ICE shooting an appropriate use of force? CNN took a poll, and 26% say yes. But 56% say it was an inappropriate use of force, and 18% haven't heard enough to have an opinion yet. Are the actions by ICE making cities more safe? Only 31% of Americans, that's only 3 out of 10, say it is, while 51% say it's less safe, and 18% say it's not really having much of an effect at all.
You know, Ed, when in law school, we were trained as lawyers, Gary and I, they used to say the most important part of a brief is a statement of the facts, and also secondarily how you frame the issue. And that would be relevant to what you just, those polls, because you mentioned, I think, 26%. The facts are being misstated by the Justice Department and by NOAM. So if you believe those misstated facts, that would affect your opinion, and also how you frame the issue. They're framing the issue, and I've heard this many times by people in his administration, is, well, if you disobey law enforcement, you're going to pay a price. But that's not a relevant issue, because that's not what the facts, that's not supported by the facts.
And driving away from that scene is not a capital crime, is it? And that's why they're spinning it into she was weaponizing her vehicle and trying to kill the guy. But when we saw the video taken from the shooter's phone, it clearly shows her turning that steering wheel to the right as quickly as she could. And if she had been trying to run over him, she would have been turning it to the left, and she would have stomped it, and she probably could have hit him. But instead, she turned away from him. Now the government's saying the guy has internal bleeding from this incident. Come on, if he'd have been hit by that car, he wouldn't have been wandering around without any effects from it.
What happened? He lost it. He was not avoiding
record.
Yeah.
But he went around to get a better shot here. He lost it emotionally. I don't know what this guy's training was or background, but he was not evading a dangerous vehicle. He was getting around so he could get a second and third shot point blank without a window into her head. That's murder.
Well, those 18% who haven't figured out whether this is bad or not are going to start going to the bad side very quickly, because you can't exist without seeing these videos somewhere on your phone that are popping up that are showing that they're ramming people's cars, they're breaking the windows of your car and yanking people out of the car and then dragging people away and leaving kids in the back seat of a car and just abandoning the car, or dogs in the back seat. I can understand that with Chrissy Nome, but the head rots from the top,
but
right?
Isn't it remarkable how many videos surfaced of this particular incident from different angles, and yet Noam wants us to believe that earlier in the day, she was literally trying to run these guys down, and there's no video of that at all. I don't know what Tapper was referring to when he said we played that stuff earlier. It didn't happen. She's just fabricating this story.
Well, this may have worked back in 1960 when you didn't have everyone having a video, video on their phone, and you have the body cams, with the police officers. I don't know what body cams do the ICE all have body cams on them at all?
No,
they should.
That's one of the things that people are calling for.
But the other problem they have, just with the internet has taken over the media. When he tries to own into CBS, it's just been completely cowardly, and the other networks. But between YouTube and the internet, it gets out there, and it gets out there instantaneously. So when you do misstate facts, you've got immediate ability to counter that misstatement.
Well, the Ellison family, the Larry Ellison and his son, who are buying up all the media companies in the country. Well, they bought TikTok too. So let's see if that continues to be the case, where your video that you upload to TikTok actually is seen by people anymore, if it's not what the administration wants.
And keep in mind quickly, it's an election year. I don't mean to interrupt you, but quickly, anything a politician does is based upon getting reelected. So it's very different this year because it is an election year for every congressman or woman, and for a good number of senators as well. So the fact that there's an election in November does make a difference. If this were early 2025, it might be different with some of these politicians.
And again, going back to the motivation of the White House to really exacerbate this situation is the fact that 68% of Americans believe that 2026 will be an economically difficult year. 59% think that consumer prices will rise at a very high rate, and 62% believe unemployment will increase. All figures that if these things actually happen are going to again work against the Republicans in the midterm elections. So
let me cite a poll to you.
Distract
a
more.
CNN poll that came out this week. If any Republican wasn't worried, they should be now. Gen Z. What is Gen Z? What age is that? Like Gen X, Gen Z. It's a younger generation, correct?
Yeah.
The date of the election, the month of the election in November 2024, Trump was up 10. He's now down 32. So he has dropped 42 points regarding Gen Z. Now, and you look at the party, the Republican Party, not just Trump. They had a 6-point advantage. I'm sorry, the Democrats had a 6-point advantage as a party in 2024. That is now gone up to 20 points. So he's losing ground both in terms of his popularity, his administration, and the party, which is dragging down these other Republican candidates.
And of course, immigration was a big pull for Crooked Donald in the election. The approval ratings of the ICE agency had dropped 30 points under Barbie Noem since all this began. So he's not even able to hold those numbers up. So it's time for our rant of the week. Here again is former pardon attorney for the Department of Justice, Liz Oyer, asking the rather spine-chilling question, What does our country stand for? Rant. All right, it's having a little trouble finding the file.
Hey, everybody. If you are struggling to understand what our country stands for at this moment in time, you are not alone. Our elected leaders say one thing one minute and do something totally contradictory the next. I want to share some facts that will help explain why we're all so confused. I'm Liz Oyer, the former pardon attorney for the Department of Justice. One of the most contradictory areas of U.S. policy this past year has been drug trafficking. Check out this timeline. January 20, 2025, Donald Trump signs an executive order declaring drug cartels terrorist organizations and announcing that it is the policy of the United States to ensure their total elimination. January 21st, Donald Trump grants a full pardon to Ross Ulbricht, founder of the Silk Road, an online marketplace that trafficked hundreds of millions of dollars worth of drugs. At least 6 people died from overdoses, including 2 teenagers. March 2025, Trump's health secretary, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., announces that he's eliminating the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Administration, the primary agency responsible for reducing overdose deaths and addiction. April 2025, Trump's DOJ cuts $88 million in grant funding for substance abuse and addiction treatment. May 2025, the Trump administration announced that it's eliminating the Organized Crime and Drug Enforcement Task Force, a specialized unit within DOJ that targets international drug cartels. This is the unit that captured El Chapo, for example. Members of Congress on both sides objected to shutting it down, but the Trump administration decided to go ahead anyway. September 2025, instead of prosecuting suspected drug traffickers through legal channels, we started bombing them. Trump launched military airstrikes on tiny boats that were supposedly carrying drugs. We haven't seen any evidence of that, but there have been more than 30 strikes to date. October 2025, Trump pardoned the owner of Binance, a cryptocurrency exchange that was used to launder money to international drug trafficking organizations. December 2025, Trump pardoned Juan Orlando Hernandez, the corrupt former president of Honduras, who turned his country into a narco state. Hernandez took millions in bribes from drug traffickers and sent hundreds of tons of cocaine into the United States. In 2024, he was sentenced to 45 years in prison, but now he's a free man thanks to Trump. January 2026, Trump sends troops into Venezuela to capture their president, Nicolas Maduro, and bring him to the United States to face charges of drug trafficking. The charges against Maduro are almost identical to the ones that Trump pardoned Hernandez for. So how can we reconcile this totally contradictory timeline? That's exactly what we should be asking our elected leaders. It's not our job to make it make sense, it's theirs. Please share this information, ask questions, and demand answers. It's what we, the people, deserve.
Ooh.
You know, Trump was interviewed recently, and he was asked if there are any limits on his power. And he said, the only limit is my own personal morality. Let that sink in. Well, how do we even know what that is? And certainly that's not the standard, but that in his mind, in his ever diminishing mind, that's what's happening. He just thinks he's above everything.
Doesn't the word dictator come to mind?
Yeah.
It does to me.
Well, let me mention something else that no one's talked about with these Venezuelan bombings. That was a military plane camouflaged as a civilian plane that dropped those bombs that killed those 2 people just trying to survive on one of the boats, which is completely contrary to law. You don't use the military in that way and have be a fake, make it look like a civilian plane to bomb these people.
Well, last Friday, the president called on oil executives to rush back into Venezuela as the White House wants to secure $100 billion in investments to revive that country's ability to fully tap into its expansive reserves of petroleum. Not working out too well because even though he wants to assure them they don't need to be skeptical of quickly investing in, and in some cases returning to the South American country with a history of state asset seizures, as well as ongoing U.S. sanctions and the current political uncertainty, he told the executives this, quote, "You have total safety. You're dealing with us directly and not dealing with Venezuela at all. We don't want you to deal with Venezuela. Our giant oil companies will be spending at least $100 billion of their money, not the government's money. They don't need government money, but they need government protection." Well, Trump doesn't really know much about business, as evidenced by the fact that he's been in bankruptcy court a half a dozen times. Doesn't understand that businesses are in business to make a profit. They don't see that prospect if they're going to spend billions of dollars to rebuild infrastructure in an unstable country while the price of oil is falling. It gets down to $50 a barrel. They can't make any money on that. And that's what their obligation to their stockholders and directors is, to make money, not to get into risky investments that could cost them dearly. So even though he doesn't understand it, they do. That's why they're successful, and he's a business failure. And it wouldn't surprise me if none of them end up going in there and developing that oil.
There's already enough oil. That's
Exactly.
the problem. There's an oversupply of oil. And as a result, that's why the market is down and the price is down, because there's a glut
And there's
of oil.
plenty of places that these companies can drill, right off the coast of Florida, right?
Well,
and here in the
they don't
States,
even have to do that. They don't even have to expand over they're
Right.
already producing the most that we've ever produced in the history of the world.
and they don't want the price to fall, because there again, the lower the cost of a gallon of gasoline, the less profit they can make on it.
So
And that's their
did you
first
see he
primary
gathered
objective.
everybody into the a big meeting at the White House,
Yeah.
all these execs from the oil companies, and he starts the meeting by getting up and walking away and staring out the window and talking about his big, beautiful ballroom. And he was looking out a window that was not the window or the door
Really?
that would actually lead to the ballroom.
Yeah, I wondered about that.
And then he walked back and he says to everybody, "Well, I guess that was a little weird timing for me to get up and do that." No joke. I mean, come on. The guy is actually, I'm really concerned about his mental capacity.
He should be concerned about the 25th Amendment.
Well, he should. I mean,
Not with that cabinet.
Trump when he started running for office after being a reality star, whatever he was, back in the day. He was very critical of the nation building going on in the Mideast by the Bush administration, and MAGA has been very opposed to this, quote, nation building. We just go into countries and take them over, which is exactly what he's doing. He's looking at Venezuela, which we just talked about. We've talked about Greenland. They've talked about Iceland. They've talked about Cuba. He was joking. Someone asked him whether or not, our Secretary our Mario, Rubio from Florida, who's the Secretary of State, would be a great head of Cuba. And he said that'd be a great idea. And, he says things. People think he says things that he's joking. He's not joking most of the times he says things. He's crazy and he's unethical and he's corrupt and he's losing his mind. Those are all fair statements. But we're now going to take over Venezuela. We're going to take over Cuba. It's all just, it is a distraction, Ed, but it's also a huge opportunity cost. We're not dealing with the issues like healthcare and accountability. We're not dealing with the fact that there's an affordability problem in this country, and he's going to pay heavily for that. Not so much him, but his party will pay heavily for that in November.
Exactly where I wanted to go with this, because although these guys are a bunch of loyalist stooges, they still know that the party's got to survive for them to survive. And so they may come to the point where they realize that Trump is become so deranged while having the nuclear codes accessible to him, that they simply need to remove him in order for the party to be able to survive and have any prospect of retaining at least the Senate, much less the White House.
Well,
now, what do you think about that?
Every time you start to think that way, then something like what happened yesterday, in the Senate, they were talking about doing a resolution that would limit his power to invade all these countries. And they were going to actually go for a war, resolution saying we have to have Congress involved before you can do these things. We're going to limit your power. Well, he started calling Josh Hawley and another guy in the Senate, and they both caved immediately. So, the search for a spine of Republicans in the Senate and the House is still ongoing, and I don't think it's going to happen. I mean, Tom Tillis this week started speaking out. Of course, he found his spine after he decided not to run again. So,
Rand Paul from Kentucky has been very vocal recently about a number of issues, including Venezuela and the bombing of these boats, and so they are few and far between. But what's that saying? DC, if you want a friend, get a dog, because no one there is your friend. They're all looking to get reelected. It's all transactional. So once you've now got, and we've talked about this before, once you've got the primaries out of the way and Trump no longer has the power to, quote, primary you, which is his primary threat and power, it may be a very different game and Gary, you've talked about this, all these purple districts where people are in serious trouble because you've got a clear evidence of about an 8 to 18% overperformance in these districts. You had mentioned this very good point a few weeks ago. When you've got a district that's purple and someone's won by 4 or 5 points, they have a very serious political problem.
Yeah.
With respect to Trump losing power or his grip on it, let's hear what Pete Buttigieg says when he expands on his explanation of the consequences of crooked Donald's steadily eroding grip on power.
It's not unusual when a president is growing unpopular and their economy is getting weaker. In this or a lot of other countries, it's not unusual for them to turn to foreign war as an attempt to divert resources and attention from their failures at home. And it's an example of a pattern that I think we can expect more of over the coming year, which is, on one hand, Donald Trump is growing weaker. Even Republicans are more likely to defy him than they were just a few months ago. But even while he's growing weaker, in fact, because he's growing weaker, he's also growing more dangerous. And I think we can continue to see dangerous, provocative, sometimes deadly decisions precisely because he can see that he is losing his grip on power here at home.
Concur? Do you have any concurrence with that?
Yeah. And what he's done just backs that up 100%. Yeah.
And so this is why I go back to what I said earlier, that the reason he's expanding this private military, this Gestapo, is to go in and seize voting machines come election day, so that he will tell us who won the elections and keep Congress in power, and then keep himself from being impeached.
He said that was the biggest mistake that he made after the 2020 election, was not going in and seizing voting machines. So, it's right out of his mouth.
I mean, the guy he should be serving 3 life sentences for all the crimes he's committed against this country. And he knows if he's ever out of power, that's likely to happen.
Well, I listened last night to a reporter, I forget his name, but he's a White House correspondent who just was speaking with Trump this week. Trump understands he's got a political problem. He does. He knows he's got a serious problem. So someone like that who's desperate, we're all playing the same sheet music here. I think he would do whatever he needs to do to stay in power, or keep the power also in Congress.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, power's everything, and he's come out and said it, and he's drunk with power. What I wonder about, though, is he wants to increase the military budget by $1.5 trillion. That's how much he wants, from the $901 billion it is now. That's over half again as much. This is because he represents the power of fiscal responsibility. But I think it's because he wants more militarism around the world so he can get that coveted Nobel Peace Prize and get our minds off the Epstein files and his inability to move the economy in the way that he promised he would.
Well, James Carville, who's one of my favorite commentators, made the point the other day. It's about winning elections, and right now that means with the primary season, as Democrats, Trump's going to F up, and he's in a horrible way. People are dying, but we just need to stay out of the way. But what Carville was saying is we need to make sure we're nominating the Democrats who can win in November, So that's a very specific task. We can't be just nominating Democrats that we think maybe fully agree with. We need to be nominating these various positions that those Democrats who will win in November.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah, and a big campaign by the head of the Democratic Party, the chairman, to instigate a voter registration campaign to get voters out into the field in November so that we can get back in control of Congress and get some sanity back in this government. Well, you're listening to the Voice of Reason. We're going to take a short time out to hear from CBS News, what's going on in national and international events. When we come back, we'll probably hear from Jerome Powell, Senator Sheldon Whitehouse. We'll open the phones if you'd like to call in and give us the benefit of your opinion. And of course, we're going to talk about the big deal of the day, the Epstein files. What's going on with them, why we aren't hearing about them here on the Tan Talk Radio Network, along with more of the issues that the conservatives never want you to hear about.
WTAM, Clearwater.
FM 106.1.
WDCF, Dade City.
FM 102.3.
Listen.
CBS News on the Hour, your home for original reporting.
I'm Deborah Rodriguez. President Trump is threatening to invoke the Insurrection Act to allow him to deploy troops to Minneapolis to quell anti-ICE protests that have flared up after a federal agent shot a Venezuelan migrant in the leg during a traffic stop. Loyola Law's Lori Levinson.
It's very rare for that act to be invoked. In fact, over the course of time, there's probably no more than 30 times that a president has invoked the act. And it's been in really extreme situations.
Homeland Security says that wounded man was coming at the agent with a shovel. U.S. Southern Command announced last hour the U.S. had seized another sanctioned oil tanker in the Caribbean with ties to Venezuela. Video shows soldiers rappelling onto the deck. Comes ahead of President Trump's meeting with Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado at the White House today. CBS's Ed O'Keefe is there.
The big unknown is how long will the Venezuelan people, both in the country and those millions who live outside across the world, wait for some return to democracy, some sense of normalcy. Is it a year? Is it several years? Or will it be shorter than that? And the meetings like the ones the president's having on Thursday can help set that tone and get a sense of the timetable.
EU countries take action a day after a stalemate of a meeting between Vice President Vance and foreign ministers from Greenland and Denmark. The BBC's Joanna Kane.
Countries including France, Germany and Sweden are sending troops to Greenland to create a more permanent military presence on the semi-autonomous Danish island. Denmark says it's also stepping up its contribution. Denmark hasn't spelt out exactly why the troops have been invited, but the Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, said America's ambition to take over Greenland remained intact and a fundamental disagreement remained.
A SpaceX capsule carrying 4 astronauts splashed down in the Pacific off San Diego after making an early exit from the International Space Station.
On behalf of SpaceX and NASA, welcome home, Crew 11.
SpaceX Dragon, it's so good to be home.
CBS's Mark Strassman.
From that capsule, looking like a charred marshmallow, the crew of 4 was removed one by one onto the deck of a SpaceX recovery ship. One of them is dealing with an unknown but concerning medical issue.
The CDC is reporting 171 new cases of measles across 9 states so far this year. Medical contributor Dr. Celine Gounder.
Measles is one of the most contagious infections known to man, which is why we need to have such high vaccination rates. Over 95% of kids need to be vaccinated to prevent an outbreak.
The Dow is up 117 points. This is CBS News.
I'm Major Garrett. Follow and listen to The Takeout on the free Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Downtown Dave. How would you like to be able to promote yourself, your business, or someone else's business for less than the cost of one 60-second commercial on many Tampa Bay radio stations? Here's the deal. You can have your own 1-hour radio program on the Tan Talk Network for less than the cost of one 60-second announcement on many Tampa Bay stations. Your program will be on 2 Tampa Bay radio stations and will cover 4 million people in Florida, plus worldwide on the internet in both audio and video. And you'll have a web link for your business on the the Tan Talk 1340 website. We provide the producer, the state-of-the-art equipment, free production of commercials, and much more. Check it out today. Call Lola O'Brien, the Irish Hawaiian, at 727-510-7622. That's 510-7622. Call Lola O'Brien now, 727-510-7622. Call now and your 1-hour radio program can start tomorrow. Call 510-7622 for Lola O'Brien, the Irish Hawaiian, at the Tan Talk Radio Network.
Shenyun 2026 are coming to the Tampa Bay area February the 6th to the 8th at Mahaffey Theater, St. Petersburg. Shenyun revives 5,000 years of civilization through choreographed dance, music combining classical, Western, and Chinese instruments, and innovative 3D backdrop. Come and see it once in your lifetime. Tickets at shenyun.com/FL. Do you have questions after being injured in a car accident or injured because of someone's negligence? Do you feel overwhelmed or uncertain about the next steps after being injured in a crash? The personal injury attorneys at Peronick, Caulfield, Averill, and Noyes have been helping their injured clients since 1955 and are now on this radio station to provide guidance to you. Listen to FLA Law each Tuesday from 5 to 6 p.m. Let their decades of experience help you and your family. Offices in Clearwater, non-attorney spokesman.
Hi, I'm Dawn Reese with the Dawn Reese Show, most powerful names in entertainment, every Thursday at 5 p.m. I have so many different segments I'm so excited to share with you, from miracle stories to celebrity interviews with Hollywood connections to travel to local business, promoting your business on the air with me, an amazing opportunity to grow your business. Tune in to the Tan Talk Radio Network, 106.1 FM on Thursdays, 5 p.m. with me, Dawn Reese.
Don't turn it off now. You need this stuff. Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network.
Now, the voice of reason continues here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. Here again is your host for today's program, Ed Golly.
For years, Republicans on Capitol Hill have tried to stay on Crooked Donald's good side, defending his policies and avoiding criticism of even his most controversial actions. In recent weeks, that dynamic has shifted, with lawmakers criticizing his opposition to the release of the Jeffrey Epstein files, his recent military action in Venezuela, and the Justice Department's investigation of the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell. Although the GOP conference remains strongly in Trump's corner overall, the rumblings come as Republicans have lost special elections and off-year races by wider than expected margins and remain down in the polls heading into the fall midterms, leading a record number of incumbents to retire. Still in studio with me today, Gary Gibbons and Kevin Carey. Pam Bondi is breaking the law every day in spite of being the nation's chief law enforcement officer, because on December 19th, she was supposed to release all of the Epstein files, unedited, unredacted. She's still sitting on them. Talk to me.
Yeah, Ed, one of the things I appreciate about us going on to 2 hours, it does give us this segment to kind of dig in a little deeper in the weeds. And I want to do that because I think, again, and I agree with you, Trump just, I think, intentionally makes us all try and divert with all this other chaos. But it is important to realize what's happening with Epstein, and things are happening now, which we need to keep on the front burner. The statute, by the way, for our listeners, just so they'll know, it's called the Epstein Files Transparency Act. It was signed into law November 19th of 25, and as you mentioned, required that Bondi and the Department of Justice turn over all of the Epstein files by December 19th, which is now over a month overdue. But I want to step back and just give the listeners a thought, because it's important as a precursor to this letter that went to Judge Engelmeyer in the Maxwell case, seeking a what's called a special master to address getting these files. But I want to remind our listeners the purpose of that act, which is House Resolution 4405, was to require the U.S. Attorney General to release all unclassified documents and records in the Department of Justice possession relating to Jeffrey Epstein. And the timeline mandated, again, this wasn't a judge order, it was by statute that Trump signed into law, was that within 30 days, which was December 19th of last year, that information be provided. Keep in mind, there was overwhelming bipartisan support. It passed the House by a vote of 427-1. There was one wayward Louisiana congressperson. And by Senate, they didn't even vote. It was by unanimous consent and signed into law within hours. This is important because this is probably the biggest abuse of what's happening with Bondi and the Department of Justice. They are taking it upon themselves to decide what they're going to produce. And let me be clear, they have now produced 0.6 of 1% of what's out there, not 6%, 0.6 of 1%, 0.6 of 1%.
Yeah.
And the statute is very clear, and I would suggest our listeners pull it up. It's not a very long statute, but allows the DOJ to make limited redactions to protect victims' privacy, national security information, and details that could jeopardize an active federal investigation or ongoing prosecution. Period. That's it. That's it. It's not meant to protect Trump. It's not meant to protect his buddies. And so what Bondi is doing in the Department of Justice is completely contemptuous of what the statute that Trump signed into law. So what happened just a few days ago was Massey and Kano, who I want to call the Simon and Garfunkel of the Epstein era, they will go down as, I think, somewhat maybe the word of Bernstein, because they are the heroes here and will continue to be, because nobody expected in November that this would happen, and certainly Trump did not, and the Republicans did not. But in the Maxwell case, which many people may think is over, it's not, because Maxwell, who was convicted in the Southern District of New York, and now serving time in this nice little cozy prison in Bryan, Texas. But Judge Engelmeyer, who still has jurisdiction as a federal district judge in the Southern District of New York, received a letter January 8th, which was about a week ago, from Massey, a joint letter from Massey and Kano, and outlining in detail why the Department of Justice has, what they have done to ignore the statute. And they outlined, just to be specific, given we have a little bit of time, the department, DOJ, failed to meet the Act's requirements in multiple respects, including missing the statutory deadline, asserting common law privileges that this Act does not permit, and applying extensive redactions that appear inconsistent with the Act's express prohibition on withholding or redacting records or to protect politically exposed persons. I know this is getting into the weeds a little bit, but it's important because that's exactly what's happening here. And again, I agree with you, Ed. I think Trump and his minions feel like, let's distract everybody from this. But as lawyers and as a former judge, this is very, very important. And this letter, listeners can pick it up in 5 seconds. Just Google this. It was last week. Just for people to understand that the volume we're talking about, the DOJ's most recent submission to the court was January 5th, which was not that long ago. It was last week, where the DOJ states that it only produced approximately 12,285 documents, comprising approximately 125,000 pages. The DOJ claims there's still more than 2 million documents to be responded to. The other numbers have been up as high as 5 million. But the point is that these Congress people do not have any confidence. I think you made this point earlier, and you may have too, that there's no confidence in anything the DOJ says to the court. So what they have asked for as what's called a amicus brief, and as Gary knows, that's a friend of the court, is asking the federal judge to appoint a special master to independently go in and say, give me the documents, DOJ. You don't redact anything. You give me everything and I'll make a determination. And what the judge has done already very quickly, I think it was Monday night, just a few days after this January 8th letter, was set a briefing schedule. And it's gotten this judge's attention. And the judge has asked for both sides to brief the issue of whether these congressmen have the ability do they have standing, which is a legal concept, to raise the issue. And some other issues. But having spent a lot of time looking at this issue this week, I feel pretty confident. You never know what a judge is going to do. I do believe that at some point there's going to be some type of special master appointed to do this. And Gary, I know you've been a lawyer for many years. I thought you might have some thoughts.
Well, The problem with the statute that they're violating daily is that it says very clearly in section B, it's entitled Prohibited Grounds for Withholding. Okay. No record shall be withheld, delayed, or redacted on the basis of embarrassment, reputational harm, or political sensitivity, including any government official, public figure, or foreign dignitary. They were very clear that you can't do this. We're not going to allow you to protect your friends. So once the president signed this, he didn't have the ability to say, oh, you've heard him say in interviews, well, a lot of people are going to get, smeared by this. And, so what? That's not what the law says, release this stuff. And what the judge is saying is he's ordered them not only to, you mentioned the briefing schedule. He said, I want to hear by Friday.
It's a very short schedule. Yes.
What the government's position is on this thing, because he's fed up. And remember that this law is a follow-up to a subpoena that the House delivered to the DOJ back in July. So it's not like they've only had a month to get these records there. They've been subpoenaed to deliver all of these records since July. And Pam Bondi said their review of them had been completed in July. So, what's going on?
Well, I can tell you there what happened, and these are complete lies and disingenuous responses to this. As early as March, they had round the clock 24/7. The facts will support this. 24/7 review of these files for the purpose of protecting Trump's ass, not for the purpose of protecting the victims or gaining the truth.
Yeah,
of
look
what
at
happened.
every document and flag the ones where Trump's name appears. Or his picture appears.
I remember as a lawyer years ago, we just did a lot of work for the FDIC, and remember going to warehouses and spending days just, taking those yellow stickies and just flagging documents. I'm sure that's what they were doing, but it was 24/7. So for them to say, oh gosh, this is an issue now that, it just came up and we don't have the time to do it. But let me convey another inconvenient fact in regard to Bondi's problem. Section 3 of the Act requires the Attorney General within 15 days of the deadline for release to submit a report to the House and Senate Judiciary Committees identifying the categories of records released and withheld and summarizing all redactions and their legal basis. As they say in the letter, to date, no such report has been provided. And their point to the judges, without it, there's no authoritative accounting of what records exist, what has been withheld, or why, making effective oversight and judicial review far more difficult. And that's right on point. And I don't know whether you've had experience, Gary, with the special master or magistrate, whatever the term might be, because I'm sure our listeners, most of them who aren't lawyers, don't maybe understand what that requires. But it is a third party who acts like a judge. They're not a judge, but they're given authority. They're usually paid by the hour. They're lawyers, and they have the authority to take all, in this case, to take all the files. They also ask, by the way, the court and review them, and then both sides can object to certain things. But the point you made is very valid, Gary. They can't say to the special master, oh, that's embarrassing Trump, it's embarrassing Clinton, whomever. Because, by the way, what they've been producing is embarrassing Clinton and Democrats. It's very clear this isn't some random act on the part of what they're slowly rolling out. So there would be hearing with this special master, and then the master would issue a recommendation to the federal judge, and there could be another hearing. So there's no question the Department of Justice would have a right to oppose this. But the point is just what you said, Gary. The statute is very clear, and we've stated once or twice already today what the exceptions are. So you're right. This has gotten the court's attention because this is mandatory. This is not some discretion that the DOJ has. And then when you add to that the fact that they are not being truthful, and it's also important to note that they're also suggesting the court compel testimony from the persons most knowledgeable from the DOJ Southern District Office about the production that has been made, the pending productions, and the representations that have previously been made to this court. Now, keep in mind that last part, representations made to the court, because what that suggests, which is the case in other areas here when we talked about the Venezuelan planes not being turned back, is there were things done clearly and properly and they're scurrying at the DOJ. They know there's a problem here, and the federal judges. The federal judge is taking this very seriously. And as you said, Gary, I was very surprised how short that timeline was. So this is not going away. And I don't know why, as a matter of politics, Ed and Gary, they being Trump and his administration think just slow walking this is helping it, because all it's doing is keeping this in the news. So if you spend 2 weeks on Venezuela and silly Greenland and whatever else, this is coming back. It's like having some kind of something on your arm that doesn't ever heal. You just keep scratching it again. It keeps coming back.
Doesn't it seem logical that he's attempting to apply the 2-week rule, right? Which applied to his release of his great health care plan, which was always coming in 2 weeks, because he realizes that's the attention span of most Americans. And by that time, they've forgotten about it. So he's thinking, anything I can do to distract from this for a couple of weeks means it'll go away. Now, my question is twofold. First of all, Bondi, as we know, is serving as Trump's personal private attorney, paid for at taxpayers' expense, and her job is to prevent these files from coming out no matter what. But what is the power of the federal government to force compliance with this law? Because if they had sufficient power, wouldn't we already be looking at these documents?
No, because the power is the power that under Article 3 any federal judge has to compel compliance. It goes back to something you've said many times. Well, ultimately, then how's it going to be enforced? If that's really your question. But we have to get to that point. We haven't gotten there yet. But there's contempt powers. That there could be incarceration issues for being held in contempt. So it's not going away. These documents are going to be out there at some point. But I want to make the other thing that's happened that continues is, there is a rank, Robert Garcia, who's the ranking member of the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform in the House, has subpoenaed, for example, Les Wexner, who was the billionaire that funded Epstein all those years. So this House Oversight Committee, to its credit, is not going away. I know that is it Romer, who's the gentleman who's the chair of the committee? Comer. Yeah. They now want to drag Clinton and his wife, both of them before the, Hillary before the committee, and they wrote a very detailed letter saying why they're not going to appear, which is kind of ironic given Trump failed to appear. He had a subpoena during the Biden years to come before Congress and said, I'm not going to appear. They didn't press the issue. No president has ever been held in contempt for that. There were two. Steve Bannon and who's the other gentleman? There were two people in the administration who spent 3 months in jail for failing to comply with a subpoena. So there are criminal ramifications of this. But so the Oversight Committee, you got Comer, I think, being very political, but they are allowing Garcia, the Democrat, to be very visible with this. So this Oversight Committee is the other, I think, right now the other hammer, so to speak, that's happening right now with Epstein.
Yeah, I think they will pursue contempt charges against Bondi because of that provision of the statute that requires her personally, the Attorney General, to file this report with Congress within that time frame, and she clearly hasn't done it. So they do have standing to bring that contempt charge.
But that contempt would be in a federal court, right?
Yeah, it would be.
So can't the president pardon her before she even makes it to the jailhouse? Just give her a pardon, right?
Well, if the assumption is, which has been the case, that we've got a president that will pardon anybody for any reason that he thinks helps him, including all these, these horrible, violent criminals on January 6th. But the other problem with someone like Bondi and other lawyers, they are subject also to bar proceedings if misstatements were made. Because again, what they're requesting is who made the representations and what were their misrepresentations. This administration, Ed and Gary, has made numerous false statements to judges. And when you make a false statement to a judge or Congress, it's very different than making it outside of that. That makes it criminal. By the way, Navarro was the other Republican who served time, and he was ultimately Peter Navarro, who was pardoned. And Bannon, by the way, was facing much more. He likes to get out and pontificate. He'd be in federal prison right now. He had very serious fraud charges, federal fraud charges that were pardoned by by King Donald.
And the Clintons, they have refused to testify, and the reason is because they're trying to get them in front of Congress, swear them in, and then ask them about things that happened, 12 years ago, and then come back later and try to prove that they made a misstatement somewhere and charge them criminally. And so, lying to Congress is a crime. And so
that's a good point.
That's why when they have these oversight hearings, a lot of the Republican chairs of these committees are not swearing in the administration officials and making them testify under oath. And then, or they're refusing to answer questions. Pam Bondi has been one of the worst at that. I'm Senator, I'm not going to answer that question. Eventually somebody's going to make them do that. But so far it hadn't happened.
Let me mention again, when you sell your soul to Trump, which is what you've done here, you have no independent ability to question anything. The irony with Pam Bondi, who has been nothing other than Trump's private attorney, which is just horrible. The irony is Trump is not happy with her right now. Insiders, and I've heard much about this, read much about this, he's very unhappy with her because he feels like she has not been aggressive enough in prosecuting, even though these prosecutions go nowhere. Grand juries refused to indict in Letitia James. The Comers went nowhere. And so that's one issue. And he feels like she botched the Epstein files. That's because of him. She told, the public that they would be released. This list was on her desk. The only reason she backed off on that, in my mind, is because Trump made her change her mind. So Trump pushes you into these positions and then criticizes you for taking those positions that were caused by him. But I have no sympathy for Pam Bondi. All of these cabinet members are making a deal with the devil, and they have no reason to complain when they understand that Trump has no loyalty toward them at all.
And isn't the real foundation of all this one thing? Trump is implicated in the files, and he knows it, and he doesn't want it coming out. He is a pedophile protector, and one of those pedophiles is himself. After all, he's the guy that walked in on the teenagers getting dressed for the teenage beauty pageant, right? Doesn't that say pedophile in all capital letters? He may have owned the pageant, but that doesn't give him the right to violate their privacy. He doesn't give a damn. Come on, he's in those files, and that's why he's doing everything to prevent them from being released, in spite of the fact that he signed the law that said they will be released, unredacted. Who the heck is kidding whom here?
Yeah, did you see it when he went to visit the Ford factory the other day? Yeah. And the one of the workers on the floor yelled, pedophile protector, and Trump is clearly seen mouthing F you twice and then flipping him off with a bird.
That's real presidential.
And well, that tells you all you need to know. He is being, that one hit close to home. Of course, then this guy gets suspended from his job, but the UAW, to their credit, said, nope, we have a contract. You can't be disciplined for free speech. And that's what he did. And so they're standing up for him.
Well, as was noted, his flipping off to the United Auto Workers and in this country, he did literally what he's been doing figuratively to us for a year now. I mean, I remember the first thing, no kidding aside, when I saw these appointments to his cabinet, the first thing I thought was that is an FU. And that's exactly what's happening here.
Mm-hmm. Well, Crooked Donald's intention to be America's first dictator means he wants total, unconditional control of the government and, if possible, the entire world. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, who refuses to capitulate to the Fuhrer, is taking the patriotic position of standing up to this bully.
On Friday, the Department of Justice served the Federal Reserve with grand jury subpoenas, threatening a criminal indictment related to my testimony before the Senate Banking Committee last June. That testimony concerned, in part, a multi-year project to renovate historic Federal Reserve office buildings. I have deep respect for the rule of law and for accountability in our democracy. No one, certainly not the chair of the Federal Reserve, is above the law. But this unprecedented action should be seen in the broader context of the administration's threats and ongoing pressure. This new threat is not about my testimony last June or about the renovation of the Federal Reserve buildings. It is not about Congress's oversight role. The Fed, through testimony and other public disclosures, made every effort to keep Congress informed about the renovation project. Those are pretexts. The threat of criminal charges is a consequence of the Federal Reserve setting interest rates based on our best assessment of what will serve the public, rather than following the preferences of the president. This is about whether the Fed will be able to continue to set interest rates based on evidence and economic conditions, or whether instead monetary policy will be directed by political pressure or intimidation. I have served at the Federal Reserve under 4 administrations, Republicans and Democrats alike. In every case, I have carried out my duties without political fear or favor, focused solely on our mandate of price stability and maximum employment. Public service sometimes requires standing firm in the face of threats. I will continue to do the job the Senate confirmed me to do, with integrity and a commitment to serving the American people. Thank you.
Well, yeah, I mean, the fact that you even have to have the chair of the Fed make that statement is incredible. Makes it sound like he's in some third world country. But politically, it makes no sense for Trump to do this. I don't understand. People think he's this great politician. Jerome Powell's term as chair ends this spring anyway. Now he has the right to stay on the board until for 2 more years through 2028, and that's his decision. But he's leaving as the chair anyway within the next few months. In the meantime, you're getting a lot of backlash, even from his own Treasury Secretary, who thinks it's a bad idea.
He didn't even know about it. Scott Bessent didn't even know that he was doing this. And Jeanine Pirro, the Fox News queen, who's now the U.S. attorney in D.C., is the one that did this. And now she's even walked it back, saying, oh, well, we sent a letter over to the Fed asking them for some documentation about this. And people that have seen the letter say it came at like December 17th. And it was one of these, hey, when you get around to, if you get a chance, would you send us, some of this backup information so we could take a look at it? And then she follows that with a subpoena and trying to investigate this guy for crimes. It's really off the rails. And there was a former person who worked in the former administration that some countries that have prosecuted or threatened to prosecute central bankers for the purpose of political intimidation or punishment for monetary policy decisions include Argentina, Russia, Turkey, Venezuela, and Zimbabwe. How are their economies doing?
And the irony, the fact that he's being essentially accused of losing control of the cost of renovating this building. But look at this big ballroom. Every time we hear about it, it goes up another, $500 million in cost. Now, the argument would be, well, it's being paid for by private donations. But what happens if we wake up to the glorious news tomorrow that Donald Trump died of a heart attack overnight? All that bribery money no longer needs to come into the White House. Now, is that job going to be finished? Or is it going to be paid for by government funds, assuming it actually gets started? Which so what he isn't demonstrating responsibility, and then turning around and saying that Powell is irresponsible when he took every single increase in or overrun to Congress and got it approved. Explained to them what needed to be done and why, and they approved it.
And cost overruns are not a crime. They may be bad business and bad management, but it's not a crime. And for them to,
Right.
I'm really concerned if the Supreme Court, they have the case of Lisa Cook coming up in the next couple of weeks. That they're going to decide whether or not Trump has the ability to fire someone from the Fed. And if they allow him that power, we are totally screwed. It's gonna really upend the whole world economy, because he's going to use that as a blank check to go in and get rid of all of them and have control. And then we're going to be Zimbabwe.
Well, I fully agree, but I want to go back just to briefly again. The politics of this, I don't understand, because what does Trump gain by threatening criminal prosecution of Powell when it's frivolous, and you're getting your own Treasury Secretary, who once he found out about it has been very critical of it, as has been members of Congress. So he's leaving his Fed chair in a few months anyway. So I think my answer to that is Trump doesn't care. Trump, he psychologically goes, when he is mad or upset about some issue, he wants vindication. And so he doesn't really care about the politics of that, because there's nothing about this that would make sense from a politics standpoint.
I think you're starting to see pushback from a lot of people on this, including some Republicans. Even John Thune finally spoke out against it. And Tom Tillis has said, I'm going to put a hold on anybody that he puts up as the replacement for Jerome Powell. And at least that'll work through November. Yeah. Because any one senator can put a hold on it. And Tillis is on the banking committee that is the people that vet whoever is going to be on the Fed. And if he says no, then there's a complete tie in the vote, and that person will never get out of the committee. So
good point.
He's not only overreached. I think it's the hand grenade's gone off in his hand.
Well, they're threatening criminal prosecution of Judge Boasberg, who's the chief judge in D.C., who's pushing the contempt proceedings for ignoring these orders to bring the planes back. So the playbook with Trump as to politicians is, I'll primary you. If you're not a politician, I will have you prosecuted. That's his playbook.
Well, we happen to have a caller that would like to check in with us at 727-441-3000. Wally's on the line. Thank you for calling. Talk to us.
Guys, just filed this under eternal optimism. Founding fathers could not have predicted that we would have had an orange Mussolini at some point in our nation's history. But given the fact that he whose name I cannot utter, has the presidency, the Congress, and the Senate, the other aspects of the American concept of constitutional law and the formation of the American government are working. Our federal courts are standing up to Trump. The freedom of the press, except for CBS paying $16 million and closing down Stephen Colbert, is working. And the freedom of speech, all the great protests around the country are working. We're standing up to this guy, and he's going to be out of office in 2028 or 2029, and he cannot stand for re-election, although there is a potential that J.D. Vance could run for president and Donald Trump run for vice president, and then if J.D. Vance wins, he would resign and Donald Trump could become president for a third term. But the terrible job Trump's doing, he doesn't have a chance to stand for re-election even as vice president, and he's going to lose his power at the midterms in 2026 this year, because the people are going to vote out the clowns that are in the House, especially I hope Mike Johnson, the Speaker. They're standing up to the president. He doesn't grasp that he thinks he's in charge, and he's far from it. So I want to congratulate both of you. I don't see how you have time to practice law and keep in touch with keep track of everything that is going on in American politics, but you're doing an excellent job, and I enjoy listening to your show.
Hey, Wally, real quick, I know I've got a lot to talk about here, but I did want to ask you one quick question kind of toward what you're saying. Do you think, we've talked about this on the show earlier, I want to get your thought, that the Republicans after the primaries, when there's no longer the threat of a person being primaried, that perhaps some Republicans after the primaries might grow some courage and some backbone to protect themselves given the general election they're looking at in November?
That's a good question. I hope so. I hope they found their backbone. I'm not counting on it because they have been so spineless for so long, especially Mike Johnson. I do hope he's voted out in midterms, but I don't know how strong he is in Louisiana. But hell, I'm sorry for that bad word. They flipped against the Constitution. They can flip back to keep their phony baloney jobs.
Well, Wally, thank you for calling in. We do appreciate it, and keep listening. And it means a lot to us to know that folks are listening. And have a great rest of your afternoon or day.
And of course, one more pitch. Go Gators. Bye.
Who the hell are they?
Well, two of us would agree with you on that one. So that's.
All right, we'll take one more quick call from Pat.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. I may be a bit naive here, so forgive me that, but it appears to me that perhaps the only way to change the current course of events in this country is through the vote. Sometimes I feel like leading Democrats and others are sitting around waiting as if the things are beginning to crumble and this is going to work out fine. It's going to be Epstein, or it's going to be the economy, or it's going to be the ballroom. We're not going to have to worry about this. But this is, for me, very reminiscent of the first term, where we pinned our hopes on what proved to be very false dreams. And so now I ask myself, the Democratic Party is at a critical point here, and I don't think it's ever been more fragmented. In fact, it's been fragmented since the second half of Obama's presidency, when they couldn't figure out whether it should be Bernie or Hillary, and that caused a huge cat fight. So my question to you guys is simply this: what in the hell should the Democratic Party in this country be doing now? Should they not be getting together, getting over their differences, defining some sort of strategy for the midterms, or should they just, like many of us, sit back and hope that Trump's going to implode and everything's going to be fine?
Pat,
what do you guys think?
Pat, that's a good question. We talked about a little earlier in the show. What Carville was saying was, toward your point, was I think what we should be doing is making sure that through these primaries, that the candidates we run to win in November are the most electable, even if that means that's not maybe the candidate, the Democrat that fully is on all fours with everything I view as a Democrat. But the key is to not say, this is all I want and I want to win with this person. Who can be most electable in November?
I think, Pat, I used to say I used to be young and naive, and now I'm just naive. But I think that what needs to happen is they need to focus on the issues that cross party lines, and affordability is one that they've certainly hitched their wagon to so far, and I think that's resonating with people, that because the Republicans don't care about affordability. They keep turning a blind eye to what's going on with people and their healthcare situation and the cost of everything. Gasoline is down a little bit, but natural gas prices are up. Most of the utility companies use natural gas now to run their power plants. So that means what you might be saving at the gas pump is you're now spending at home. So those are the things I think that they're going to have to deal with. I think everybody agrees that a sealed border is a good thing. And certainly what's happening with the overreach with ICE is going to be a issue in the midterms. And I think people are going to be fed up with the fact that all of this is costing money, and there's been no accountability of how much it's costing. And once those figures start to trickle down, and they see how much is being spent on these military interventions and everything else, I think people are really, especially the younger folks, that, Kevin mentioned earlier that the young people have really turned on this administration. And let's face it, people in that generation grew up when there were endless wars, and the only reason that they voted for Trump and became MAGA friendly at all was that he promised that he wasn't going to do that anymore, and now he's not. So, if Democrats can get out of their own way, they should win.
Well, I was going to say, James Carville, that's his advice. If you want to pay him, just get out of the way. This economy is not going in a good direction. We haven't mentioned tariffs today. Tariffs are going to will be crippling this economy, particularly tied to, Gary, you mentioned the affordability issue, which Trump is not even addressing. In fact, he came out in a press conference to challenge that premise that there was any type of affordability problem in this country. Pat, what are your thoughts? That is a good question. Any further thoughts?
Oh, I think it's probably a little bit of all of that, right? I, again, perhaps naively, pin some hopes on, I think the best thing the Democrats have going for them is Donald Trump. I think he's a catastrophe.
Yeah.
And so I sort of agree with the Carville line of get the hell out of the way and things will take care of themselves. But, we did that the first time around in the first movie. We wind up, everybody saw it, and then 47% said, yeah, let's do that again.
Well, we got him out once, and we did knock him out once. We didn't knock him down for good was the problem.
No, I think you're right. I think you have to be for something and not just against somebody. And I think the Democrats are going to figure that out and start messaging that way. And because people are hurting.
Yeah. We got to move along now. Ed, let's just kill the break. We'll give Dimmitt an undeserved break this week and go right to Jon Stewart.
Thank you, Pat, by the way, for calling in.
Because I think he has such a prescient point about how divided we are and how we see the same issue in completely different ways. So we'll run that, and then when we come back, we want to have a little time to talk about the Citizens United issue and what's going on with that.
This president has made monumental changes to the manner in which this country operates. And the American people are rightfully feeling a vertigo about how a country born on self-determination and constitutional republic principles can turn into, whatever you say, boss. Sounds like a good idea, boss. So I think the American people reasonably have questions. But when the American people raise those questions...
What
a stupid question. Are you stupid? Are you a stupid person? It's a stupid question. Just a terrible question. You are a terrible reporter. You're a terrible person and a terrible reporter. You got nothing about nothing. You're fake news. Quiet.
How dare we? How dare we? How dare we question His Excellency? I don't know what we were thinking. You know what? We owe you an apology, sir. Mr. President, sir. We are so deeply sorry to have questioned your singular and delicate genius. It's just that this is a kind of an adjustment for us because we've all been raised in the American system of government. I'm not going to get into the weeds with it. 3 co-equal branches of government, checks and balances, something about quartering soldiers. I think it's quartering. It's in cursive. The Q could be a P or an S. The point is this. That's what we've been operating under for the last 250 years. If you want to learn about it, President Trump, you can ask all your acolytes. They say they keep it in their pockets. I guess it's kind of a relic. So just have to give us some time to adjust to this new world of total compliance so we can understand the rules because, it's confusing. Like, for instance, we all watched the footage of January 6th, but I think we may have gotten a very different interpretation of it rather than the correct interpretation of it, which, of course, is yours. So help me out here. We'll play a game. On January 6th, a bunch of...
They were peaceful people. These were great people.
Went to the Capitol.
Peacefully protesting a stolen election. I have never seen such spirit and such passion and such love.
But while they were there,
Capitol Hill police officers instigated the violence that day.
So the people we saw earlier beating the shit out of police officers were hardworking, loving people provoked by law enforcement. And ultimately, they deserve a
full pardon.
Got it. Don't agree that's what actually happened or what should have happened afterwards, but at least it sets a precedent. But now let's jump ahead, I don't know, a day to January 7th. We've all seen that footage. I think I know what I saw that day too, but let's go through it again with the correct interpretation. On January 7th, a
highly disrespectful,
deranged lunatic woman,
professional ICE agitator,
domestic terrorist,
did what?
This woman used her car as a weapon
and tried to run over an ICE agent.
An attempted murder.
And so she was
shot and killed.
So while very little of the descriptions that you were saying matched what we all saw on the tape, the important lesson here is what?
She brought it upon herself.
We are in a confusing, dark place. And this is where, quite frankly, rule of law and institutions are kind of an important framework. But now that those are gone, what's our North Star?
Do you see any checks on your power on the world stage? Is there anything that could stop you if you wanted to?
Yeah, there's one thing, my own morality, my own mind.
So nothing. But thank you, I'm no longer confused. Couldn't be more clear. In America today, Donald Trump is the sun. And if you revolve around him and worship him, his warmth shines upon you. You could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and not lose his support, as long as it's done on his behalf. But if you do not support him, if you live in the darkness of what I guess we will refer to from now on as blue states, fearing the day he turns his terrible wrath towards you, whether you're a single human woman on a side street somewhere in Minneapolis or a sovereign nation that happens to have land and resources that we, a larger sovereign nation, think we also might want. And so his people are making a bet that adhering to a principle of forced compliance and coercion will give us a more stable and prosperous America than a principle of shared alliance and common interest. It's kind of a tough bet because I read somewhere, I don't know where, that people have inalienable rights granted by a creator, not a king. So holding that coerced world together is going to be kind of a tall
task. Jon Stewart, The Daily Show.
Well, very well said.
Yeah. He's great and he's right. And it's so confusing because none of it makes any sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the importance of humor, which he has, is truth. There's certainly truth to what he said, and it's frightening. But we're talking about it. There are going to continuing to be protests. You know, I do think after these primaries, some Republicans will grow a spine for their own survival, not because of any innate virtue, but knowing that they need to do that to survive.
Yeah, and of course, one of the issues that we deal with in this political climate is Citizens United. We have a few minutes left that we want to use to address that. Rhode Island Senator Sheldon Whitehouse will explain for us during an interview the false facts that Citizens United was founded on.
One is the finding that all this unlimited money that was allowed to be poured into elections was going to be spent purely independent from campaigns, and therefore it wouldn't be corrupting. Basically, it'd be ExxonMobil able to take its First Amendment rights and put up an ad saying, oil is great, clean energy sucks, and we don't like Sheldon Whitehouse. But in fact, as Campaign Legal Center and End Citizens United and other groups have shown over and over again, there's enormous coordination between super PACs and candidates. In fact, in most cases, the super PAC is specifically designed not to represent ExxonMobil's views, but to be for a single candidate. It's a one candidate super PAC. So why are they not going to be coordinating with that one candidate's campaign? They just have to do it quietly. Yeah. The other piece, and the one that's truly indisputable, is that they were wrong when they said you don't have to worry about corruption because all of the money that's going to be spent will be effectively disclosed. There will be transparency for voters into who's spending the money. Again, that model in their minds was, we're ExxonMobil, we approve this message. But of course, that is not what happened in real life. In real life, there's billions of dollars being spent in dark money. And that completely disproves the transparency predicate that they hung up as a fact. And if you look at the way the decision was organized, these two facts were essential to the analysis of the decision. This has been like the cartoon character who walks off the cliff and keeps walking, keeps walking, keeps walking. This Citizens United decision keeps walking, even though the ground of proper fact that it should have stood on has completely fallen away. It's a serious wrong by the Supreme Court. They shouldn't be doing fact-finding in the first place. For sure, it's wrong to do false fact-finding. And once they know it's false, they ought to be going back to clean up their error. They shouldn't just persist stubbornly in a false fact because it works for the big donors who got them on the court.
Briefly stated, I know a lot of times, Senator Whitehouse has been very strong on this dark money issue, which has just really become a huge issue. But one of the points he's made in a separate statement, that may be in that same day, and I'll turn the floor over to you two, but since Citizens United, and people may say, why are we talking about that years later? Because it infects every election we have because of this dark money and because of the other points he made. But since that ruling, there's not been one bipartisan debate about energy in this country. And that's a big deal. No Republican will engage in a bipartisan discussion of this energy issue because of the protection and the monies provided, dark monies, by the oil industry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and what we've seen is that in that decision that the court actually went far beyond the limited issue that Citizens United presented, which was whether a company could spend money to promote an ad that was, or essentially a documentary that was complimentary of Hillary Clinton. And they said, oh, no, we can't just decide this issue. We need to decide this bigger issue of whether or not speech equals money, and money equals speech, and that corporations have the rights of individuals to speak using their wallet. And what's happened is, in addition to the things he's talked about with the dark money, they've used all these loopholes so that you never see who the people are that are actually giving the money. But you've got these billionaires, huge number of billionaires that are contributing hundreds of millions of dollars annually to these campaigns. And it's a drop in the bucket for them. They don't even miss the money, but they've used it for power and influence that's really ruined the entire political system. And so, the biggest problem that we have with government not functioning the way they used to is this decision.
Well, I think that's true. And just one example of that is energy. I mean, there's no question that what Trump has done with energy is ignore the better approach and stick with big oil, which is yesterday's solution. That's just one example, because they're protected. These politicians are protected by this dark money.
And wouldn't it also carry over to the insurance industry? It's why we'll never have universal health care in this country. We'll never have Medicare for all, because that industry is going to continue to buy politicians. It's essentially legal to buy politicians. And didn't this decision get handed down about 2010?
Yes.
So it's been with us for
15 years of bad law.
Our listeners may not understand that when you run for office, the norm is you have to, a list of contributors is of public record. When I ran for judge in 2002, everyone who gave $1 to my campaign was listed in a public record. That's the norm, not this.
Well, of course, Elon Musk came right out and made it quite clear that he dropped 250 million balloons into Crooked Donald's campaign, and look what he got for it.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
He was well reimbursed for that.
Well, the point is, as you both made, I think very well, is how did this decision affect our democracy and how we address solving our problems? And there's no doubt in my mind, I think your minds, it's had a very negative effect.
Well, and it also discourages people from participating in the political process, because, the average donor, people, the rank and file people out there in America, the average amount of their donations to political campaigns is less than $30, And so if you look at the last election, Trump received $481 million from just 10 people. Elon Musk gave 118 million. Timothy Mellon gave 150 million. You know,
Yeah. And they aren't doing it out of the goodness of their heart.
yeah. So
They
what,
expect
why
to
am I
be
going to give them
compensated.
$20? What am I going to get for
Yeah.
that? You know?
Their investment has been very well received and enhanced.
It has. And that brings us to our quote for the day, which came from a fellow named Thomas Jefferson, who said, "When government fears the people, there is liberty. When the people fear the government, there is tyranny." And I think our whole 2 hours has been kind of steering us in that direction, hasn't it, today? Well, stay with us here on the Tan Talk Radio Network for national and international news coming up from CBS. We will be back again next week for another edition of The Voice of Reason here on WTAN. I want to thank my co-hosts for today, Kevin Carey, and of course, Gary Gibbons. So let's see, what else we got? We'll be back next week. As I said, I'm Golly reminding you, if the statement seems a little too implausible to be true, don't believe it just because a conservative said it.
Make them prove it.
WTAN, Clearwater.
FM 106.1.
WDCF, Dade City.
FM 102.3.
Listen.
This is CBS News on the Hour, your home for original reporting.
I'm Steve Kathan. President Trump has threatened to invoke the Insurrection Act to justify deploying troops as protests against ICE persist in Minneapolis. Legal analyst Lori Levinson.
I want to emphasize that even if there's a protest that has violence that comes with it, that doesn't equate with an insurrection or rebellion. So that's why the act is so rarely used.
There were new protests in Minneapolis last night after an ICE agent shot and wounded a man in the leg. The U.S. military says it seized a Venezuelan-linked oil tanker in the Caribbean this morning. Today, President Trump meets with Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado. Foreign policy analyst Oliver Stunkel.
A lot of Venezuelans believe that Trump would seek to install the opposition leader who's thought to have won the 2024 presidential election. However, he has not done that. More than that, he's actually actively undermined her and said that she's currently not able to govern. She doesn't have, quote unquote, respect in the country.
The U.S. is imposing a new round of sanctions on officials in Iran accused of repressing protests in this week's deadly crackdown. Prosecutors here at home have charged 20 people, including 15 former college players, in an alleged scheme to fix basketball games. CBS's Scott McFarlane.
Players in some major college basketball programs have been bribed, allegedly, to tank their performances to enrich sports gamblers. These are some rather large school programs at which this is allegedly happening. From the Big East, schools like St. John's and DePaul and Georgetown.
NASA says the astronaut with a medical issue who just returned to Earth with 3 others from the space station is fine and in good spirits. Our space consultant, Bill Harwood.
Yeah, they said this wasn't an emergency return, but obviously it was to get the astronaut back on the ground as soon as reasonably possible so they could carry out more thorough tests than they can do in orbit.
California Governor Gavin Newsom is blocking Louisiana's effort to extradite a doctor accused of mailing abortion pills out of state.
Louisiana wants to extradite Dr. Remy Cueto, a Bay Area doctor who allegedly provided abortion pills to a Louisiana woman in 2023. Louisiana Attorney General Liz Murrill.
It's illegal drug trafficking, and we will continue to prosecute those doctors.